competition that arose between the the two counties or whatever cities at that time.
So from the point of the state trooper calling you and the indictment, how soon did the national media jump a hold of this story? I know CBS came down, Steve Hartman did a piece on it, and the New York Times wrote a piece on it.
Yeah. I don't have a clear memory of the date that happened, but it surely happened by the time the local newspaper got a hold of the story, and surely by the time the indictment issued, they got hold of the story and just ran with it. And it was in the paper all the time. And a lot of people said, what's the big deal about this rock? And I remember being in the Kentucky Capitol Rotunda. And Dwight Cropper was with me and several other people. I think Reginald Meeks. He's a fellow he's a state representative from the Louisville area that's really interested in these things. And we're all there, and gosh, all these TV people and newspaper people. And I remember this woman from the LEX asked me, "What is the big deal about this rock?" And I thought for a minute, and I said, "Well, I don't know, but if it wasn't the big deal, I wouldn't have 7 cameras looking at me now, would I?" So I don't know. But it captured the attention of a lot of people.
So how did the rock end up where it is today? Because those guys had it over and gave it to the city of Portsmouth, essentially, and then eventually it came back to Kentucky. How did it finally get back over here?
Let me think. It seems to me that they borrowed the services of a local contractor and brought that thing on a lowboy trailer. And I don't remember who that was, but they had the capability of loading it in the Portsmouth garage over in Portsmouth, Ohio. And so they strapped this thing down and put it on a lowboy and brought it over to Greenup County. And as far as I know, the thing is still sitting in the county garage down there, away from its original home.
So during the trial, eventually all charges were dropped. Was that sort of a political move from Kentucky to say, hey, let's just get this media attention away from this, let's just bury the hatchet here?
Well, a lot of things. One of the things that, if you read the briefs and memos that my office wrote in the case, you go back to what I told you about, nobody had seen this rock since, I don't know, before the locks and dams went in, which was a long time ago. So when it was registered with the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there was no latitude and longitude, and they do that on all these monuments, natural and man-made. So nobody knew exactly where the rock was until Stephen Schaefer and his people located it by diving down and finding it. So I would say Steve Schaefer was probably the first to know the exact coordinates of this rock. Nobody ever measured it. And then you've got another thing. You have a lot of pictures of Indian Head rock that lead you to believe that is in fact a rock. But if you read all the historical accounts on it, some people talked about Indian Head rock being in another place, pretty far away from where Schaefer found it. Some accounts talk about it being found at the mouth of the Scioto River. And I'm told by Mr. Cropper, who's a pretty good historian, that the river was actually moved at one time from the mouth of it at the river, at the Ohio, where it meets the Ohio River, was actually moved downstream. So nobody, could figure out. And these were pretty good historical accounts of where this rock was. And a lot of them talked about the rock looking like an actual Indian head. Like maybe some of them talked about they I don't know if they fantasized it or actually saw it, having feathers or something carved on it or whatever. But as it turns out, the rock that Schaefer finds merely has a circle like you would draw with a compass, and then a carving in the rock based on the markings provided by the compass. So it didn't look like an Indian at all, but there were a lot of old dates on it, and I think Greene, Kentucky, for instance, was founded in 1803. So you got some pretty early dates, and the earliest we could read were around 1850. But there were other numbers on that rock that had been worn away by time and abrasion in the water, and it would be difficult to know what those dates are. They could be earlier if they were carved in the same depth as that one. So I guess what it boils down to is that I foresaw that because of the lack of ability to actually pin this down as a registered site, I felt that there would be jurors who would say this is not Indian Head Rock beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, this is probably Indian Head Rock, but it might not be, based upon these other historical accounts. And I knew I had been up against these defense lawyers who were representing Stephen Schaefer many times, and I knew they were bright fellows, and I knew they'd be onto that. And so that was, of course, one of the reasons. Other reasons were, as you say, many people didn't see the significance of the case to begin with. Other people were on fire about it. You never know who's going to come in on a jury. In a fair sampling of the community, you're going to get people that are saying, hey, Mr. Duvall, you're wasting money on this case. And other ones are going to say, no, by golly, we got to protect it. But all it takes is one to mess your case up. We're in a criminal case, and they have to have a unanimous verdict. So there were a lot of reasons, and those were among the chief ones that I felt that a conviction against Stephen Schaefer and his men was in question. So we settled that part, and the state seemed to be happy to get their rock back, although I feel personally that the rock loses significance when you take it out of its place. It's kind of like losing a tooth. It's pretty useful when it's in your mouth, but when it's under your pillow, you might get $1 for it, and that's about it.
We talked to Bobby Carpenter, Judge Executive of the county, last week, and he told us that I forget how many years he says left on his term, 2 or 3 years. He'd like to find it a home outside of that garage somewhere.
Well, I'm sure it's taking up a lot of space there. It weighs about 8 tons or something, doesn't it?
Where do you think a good compromise of a place for it to be would be? Well, home.
Well, we talked about that, and things that have significance like that, it really wouldn't have the same significance if you went over and dumped it back in the river, because you wouldn't get it back in the same place, and it'd probably never be seen again anyway, unless the dam breaks or something. And over time, it's going to erode and lose any markings that it has on it. So we thought, well, it would be nice to use it as a small tourist attraction in perhaps a large gazebo under glass or something. Wouldn't want to have direct, public to have unguarded direct access to it. They might take a spray can to it or something. So I felt that would be a good way to go, maybe for the city of South Shore or the unincorporated South Portsmouth. That's where it came from.
Now, last question for you here. Now, in your entire law career, and in your years as Commonwealth attorney, was this the strangest or one of the strangest cases you ever worked? It was,
and I would go. I get in my car and go to Lexington and meet people, and there would be people across the room or across the street yelling "Rock Man" at me, you know. So you could do any number of untold murder cases or whatever and come up with some great verdicts, but you're always known as the Rock Man after that. So it was, in that respect, I think, unexpected on my part, but I had more fun with it, and Dwight Cropper really educated me on the Indians that were here during the time of Christ, you know, and I think a lot about that when I see Indian mounds and all the rich unwritten heritage that we have in this country and in this area. So in that respect, it was a rewarding case for me, and it provided a lot of entertainment for everybody else.
Any lasting comments you'd like to say about the Rock or the trial or anything else?
Well, and I'm sure Schaefer would agree with me that it's a mystery. The Rock's a kind of a mystery, and I think that's how he got involved in it. I think that there's a little bit of the mystery left because I'm not really sure if there's not another rock out there that had some significance and was called Indian Head Rock. I don't know that for sure because there were accounts of it, and they were fairly reliable, although all the pictures I ever saw of it, I believe, matched this rock. Also, think about I think there was one newspaper account where several hundred or maybe 1,000 people, I can't remember how many people, gathered along the shoreline down there